Well, hey there. Thank you for joining me today as I continue our 6 Steps series. And my message title for today is Lightweights. Lightweights. Normally when we call somebody a lightweight, it's not a very kind thing to do. We're kind of suggesting they're maybe not up for the task. They're not good enough for the situation. They can't handle what is coming their way. I guess most frequently it gets used to describe people who can't handle their drink, but that's really not a great analogy for us. But we just think of a lightweight as somebody who can't carry what has been given to them. I'm going to read from this passage in 2 Samuel 6, which is where we're kind of basing for this 6 Steps series. Let me read from verse 1. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Bala in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. This feels like a brutal moment. I mean, it is a brutal moment. David and all of his people are bringing the ark of God back into Jerusalem, and they're mid-party celebrating, shouting, dancing, God's with us again. And then suddenly, God strikes Uzzah dead. It's one of those moments in the Old Testament where you're like, God, this doesn't seem fair. Like, God, you seem a little bit angry and vicious. God, what's going on here? So in our 6 Steps series, we're trying to do a couple of things. We're trying to highlight again how we kind of organize as a church, how we as the people of God function together. This is something that we did back in 2020, and we're revisiting it again now just to remind ourselves. But we're also thinking about, what does it mean to be the people of God? Not just how we organize, but who we need to be. So if I run through our kind of ministry model again for you, it's based on the idea of these Russian dolls that we start off with just our individual relationships, and really there's not much organization from us as a church towards that. That's just how we as Christians live. We live in community with our brothers and sisters. We love one another, we challenge one another, we pray for one another, we encourage one another, and we hold one another to account. But then stepping beyond our individual relationships, we encourage you then to become a part of a group and a team where you can be needed and known, where you can be a family with other people around you. Then from our groups and teams, we start to step up into our collectives and our gatherings. This is where we don't just come together now in our individual relationships or come together as a happy family. Actually, there's a whole mass of us coming together to represent who God is to the world. In our individual relationships and groups and teams, it's kind of about us as individuals. In our collectives and our gatherings, it's now us as a people, the people of God carrying God's presence into the world. And as we do that, then we move into our locations, currently Chelmsley, Stratford, Solihull, online. We move into the whole of who Renewal is, and this is where we're a gospel movement from one to many. Because we're the people of God, we can start to transform the locations and the areas that we are in. But as Johnny ran through with us last time, it's not just hard work, it's heart work. It's no good us organising brilliantly if our hearts aren't in it, if our hearts aren't pure before God. And we saw with Johnny last time the heart of David to be all in and to not care what others might think versus the heart of his wife, which was critical and condescending and taking a step back. You know, whenever the presence of God is amongst a people, whenever God is moving and doing something, you have one of two choices. Am I just going to go all in, or am I going to step back? So what's the link then between our kind of ministry model, the way we organise, and these passages that we find in 2 Samuel? Well, the link is this. If we're trying to organise as the people of God, then as the people of God, we're called to carry the presence of God. We're not trying to organise to be efficient and clever. We're trying to relate together so that we can carry the presence of God. Because it's the presence of God that makes the church unique. There are much better speakers that you could be listening to right now. I mean, they're more intelligent, they're more funny, and they're far better looking, and they'll probably be quicker than I will be. There are other communities out there where you can find friendship and love and support. There are other organisations that can support those in need better than maybe we can. But the one thing the church does that nobody else on the planet can do, no other group of people are called to, what the church can do is carry the presence of God out into the world. And in the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant was the place where the presence of God was. It was a physical symbol on earth that God was amongst his people. Then, of course, in the New Testament, we have Jesus coming to be God amongst us. And now, as the church, we carry that presence with us. But in the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant is where the presence of God is. And so that's why we're basing in 2 Samuel 6 for a little bit, because we want to learn some lessons. What does it mean as the people of God to carry the presence of God? So this brutal moment where there's dancing, there's celebration, the presence of God is coming back into Jerusalem, the cart slips and the ark starts to fall off the cart, and Uzzah just reaches out his hand and touches it and then ends up dead. Well, before we can understand this moment, I think we need to track back a little bit, because there are some lessons that the people of God should have learned about what it means to carry the presence of God, and those lessons have gone ignored. Lesson number 1 in how not to handle the presence of God is simply this: don't think God's presence is here to make us bigger. Jump with me back to 1 Samuel 2. Verse 27, it says this: Now a man of God came to Eli and said to him, "This is what the Lord says, did I not clearly reveal myself to your ancestors' family when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh? I chose your ancestor out of all of the tribes in Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod in my presence. I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribed for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel? Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever, but now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me I will honor, but those who despise me will be disdained." What's going on here is that Eli is a priest ministering before God with the ark. And he's got 2 sons, and his sons are priests as well, but their behavior is shocking. When people are bringing their offerings to God, rather than offering them properly, his sons are stealing the food that should be being burnt up or cooked before God, and they're taking the best for themselves. Not only that, but they're using their position as priests to gain access to women so that they can sleep with them. It's really rough stuff. And it does still happen today. People in the church use their position to fatten themselves up, to make themselves larger, to get the blessings for themselves, and they use their position to abuse and mistreat people. And when it's called out, we all stand back and go, that's despicable. How can leaders do that? How can that happen in the church? And we are absolutely right to do that. But at the heart of it, I think there's a question that we all need to ask ourselves. God's question rings out. Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel? God calls to Eli, why are your sons making themselves larger? When the presence of God is amongst his people, there's this really hard tension for us to walk. Because where God's presence is, there is blessing. If you track through 1 and 2 Samuel, you'll see wherever the ark goes, wherever it is, things just happen. That's why David's so keen to get it back into Jerusalem, because he's told, hey, wherever the ark goes, people get blessed. The presence of God is bringing abundance and blessing. But I guess the question that God asks is, who are we trying to fatten up? I mean, in one sense, not literally, but in this sense, very literally, because Eli's sons are fattening themselves up. But at the end of God's pronouncement, he makes this statement to Eli. Those who honor me, I will honor. Those who despise me will be disdained. Now, when it says disdained in the original Hebrew, it means to be treated lightly, to be considered slight, to be considered a trifle, just a little whisper of a thing. There's this wordplay that's going on because the Hebrew word for the glory of God is about the weightiness of God, the gravitas of God, the largeness of God. You know those people when they walk into a room, they just bring kind of gravity with them. The way they hold themselves, the way they conduct themselves, who they are as a person, they're a person of gravitas. I think back to when I was in primary school, you know, if you've got a supply teacher in the classroom, you kind of behave one way, but when the head teacher walks in, there's a gravity that walks into the room. And when we think about God's glory, we think about the weightiness of who God is. And God says to Eli, your sons are trying to increase themselves and they're treating me as light. So I'm going to treat them as lightweights. We have to guard against this desire within us that actually we don't belong to Renewal, we don't belong to the people of God. God's presence isn't here to make us larger and better. It's not here to fulfill our desires and our satisfactions and make us pleased with ourselves. No. It's here so that we can glorify God. In the words of John the Baptist, he must increase and I must decrease. If we're going to be the people that carry the presence of God, we have to understand it's not for our name to get greater. It's for his name to be given the glory it so rightly deserves. Lesson number 2, don't think God's presence is here to make our plans successful. Stick with me, we're going to go to 1 Samuel 4 verses 1 to 10. Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let's go and bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go before us and save us from the hand of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh, and they brought back the ark of the covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. When the ark of the Lord's covenant came into the camp, all Israel raised a great shout so that the ground shook. Hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "Oh no, nothing like this has happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? They are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, Philistines, be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated. And every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's 2 sons died. Again, it's another tragic event. Israel goes out to fight their enemies, the Philistines, and they get beaten. And they're like, "Well, what's going on? We thought we were going to be successful. What's happening here? I know what we need to do. Let's get the presence of God. Because then the presence of God will mean our plans become successful." And again, there's lots of shouting and partying and celebrating as they bring the ark into the camp. But they're not rejoicing because God is with them and they're delighting to be with God. They're rejoicing because they think God is there to bankroll their plans. They're rejoicing because they think God has come to make them successful. And it ends in tragedy. And the ark, the very symbol and place where the presence of God is amongst his people, is captured by Israel's enemies and taken away. You know, God is gracious and kind and merciful and full of favour. But we can't just wheel him out when we think we need him. God's generous, but he's not just here to bankroll whatever we want to see happen. You know, often in prayer, or if I'm honest, it kind of starts in frustration and kind of ends up in prayer, because frustration is a great tool to drive you to prayer. I kind of find myself going, "God, why isn't this working out? God, why didn't that go as I thought it would? God, in my head, this plan was great, but when it hit reality, it kind of crumbled a little bit. God, why isn't this growing? Why isn't this more successful? Come on, God, if you're with us, why aren't you doing what I want you to do?" But, you know, like Israel, we have to learn, you know, God's presence isn't here to serve us. God isn't with us to make happen what we want to happen. We are here to serve him. Don't think that God's presence is here to make our plans successful. God's presence isn't amongst us to make our name great, to make us bigger. It's not here to make our plans successful. Lesson 3, don't think we can carry God's presence by following the world's lead. So you've just heard the ark is captured by the Philistines. And again, I encourage you to read through those chapters in 1 Samuel, because some interesting things happen when the ark of the Lord is amongst the Philistines, and they get to the point where they're like, "This is causing too much trouble. Let's return it. Let's send it back with thanks. Has someone still got the gift receipt? Because we don't want this thing anymore." So here's what happens, 1 Samuel 6. The Philistines say, "Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in the chest beside it put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory towards Beth Shemesh, then we will know the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us, but that it happened to us by chance." So they put the ark of God on a cart with some oxen, and the oxen take the presence of God back up to the people of God, back to Beth Shemesh. But again, the people of God treat the presence of God too lightly. Because in verse 19 it says, "God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them." So you see, God never said that the ark should be transported on a cart. It was the Philistines that did that. God said the ark was to be carried on poles on the shoulders of his people. But the world put the ark on a cart when they sent it back to Israel. And you see, the Philistines didn't know any better, but the people of God should have done. And again, they treat God too lightly, because as it comes back, they're like, oh, let's open it up and have a little peek. And Samuel tells us God dealt them a heavy blow. Again, it's that word heavy. Again, they treat God too lightly, and they find out that there is a heavy consequence. The people of God have adopted the patterns of the world around them. And so we come to this moment then that we started off when Uzzah reaches out his hand to stop the ark falling off the cart. And we can say, that's really unfair that he ended up dead. He was only stopping it falling off a cart. But we have to understand it should not have been on the cart in the first place. And time again, leading up to this moment, God's people have treated God's presence too lightly. And God has to step in and go, enough. You cannot carry me like this. You can't just do whatever you feel like. You can't just throw a party and celebrate but ignore the weight of who I am. You can't think that you can just do this in your own way, by your own fashion, whatever seems right to you. No. I have set out how my presence is to be carried. It's not to be driven on a cart. It's to be carried reverently. My presence isn't amongst you to make you look better and bigger. My presence isn't amongst you to fulfill all of your plans. And my presence isn't amongst you so that you can be like everybody else around you. My presence is amongst you to show that you are a unique, holy, separate people. Full of joy, yes. Full of dancing, yes. Full of celebrations, yes. Full of loud shouts, yes. Full of tambourines. Maybe not. But amongst all the partying and celebration, there has to be a weight and an understanding that God in heaven is choosing to dwell with us on earth. And if we are the people of God who carry God's presence out into the world around us, we cannot be lightweights, and we cannot treat God lightly, but we have to honor him. And as we honor him and give him the weight and the glory and understand that we are here to serve him, then we will find he does honor us. But we're not in it for that. We're in it to lift up the name of Jesus.
Hello, my name's Naomi. It's been great to have you with us for our message here at Renewal. If you want to find out more about what it means to follow Jesus, you can visit renewalcc.com/next steps, and you'll be sent a few videos which might answer some of those bigger questions that you might have. Likewise, maybe you just want to say hello to the team, so you can email hello@renewalcc.com. And then if you're really enjoying all of these videos, what you can do is click the subscribe button, which is the wonderful red button that you cannot miss on your screen, to be notified of any other videos that come in. You can also listen to our messages on the go. So if you visit renewalcc.com/media, you'll be able to see podcasts, and then that will also link you to the YouTube channel. But maybe actually you just want to support the work that Renewal is doing. And you can do that by visiting renewalcc.com/give, and you can choose where your finance goes. All that's left to say is take care, God bless, and have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you soon.